Hello everyone. Today we are diving into one of the most powerful detective tools in a risk manager's belt, assumption analysis. Formally, this is a technique that explores the validity of assumptions as they apply to the project, identifying risks from the inaccuracies, inconsistencies, or incompleteness of those assumptions. In plain English, it means we are checking for the things we believe to be true without actually having proof yet. We all do this every day. You might assume the bus will arrive on time, but if it doesn't, you're late for work. That's a risk. In our projects, we often move forward based on these invisible beliefs. I once worked on a project where we assumed a key stakeholder would approve our budget because he always had in the past. But he had recently changed his focus to cost cutting, and our assumption almost sank the project. By calling out these assumptions, we find the stakeholders who are actually holding the strings. So now that we have mastered the idea that assuming makes a risk out of you and me, you might be wondering how we actually go about finding these hidden beliefs. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is document scraping. To find these assumptions, we have to start with identification and documentation. The technical books describe this as the systematic process of reviewing project plans and narratives to pull out every statement treated as a fact without evidence. To put it simply, we are looking for words like will, shall, or expected to. Stay with me here because you've probably seen this in a project proposal. It might say, the IT department will provide the server by Friday. That is an assumption. The moment you see that, a bell should go off in your head. Who in the IT department? Do they even know about this Friday deadline? By circling these statements, we are actually uncovering silent stakeholders. Every assumption is tied to a person or a group who needs to make that assumption come true. If you don't write them down, they stay invisible until they fail. Now, once we have a big list of these quote-unquote beliefs, we can't treat them all the same. We need to test how sturdy they are, which brings us right into our next step, which is testing for validity. This brings us to the validity testing phase. Formally, this is the assessment of each assumption to determine the likelihood that it will actually prove to be true. In everyday English, we are asking, how much do we really trust this? It's like checking the ice on a lake before you walk on it. If you assume the ice is thick but you see water ripples, your validity is low. In the office, if you assume a stakeholder is on board just because they didn't complain in a meeting, that's a shaky assumption. We want to look for evidence. Has this person supported us before? Do they have the budget to support us now? Let's break this down together because a low validity assumption is a high priority risk. We are looking for the cracks in the foundation of our plan. Now, knowing if something is likely to be true is important, but we also need to know what happens if we are wrong, which leads us straight into the concept of impact assessment. Now we have to tackle impact assessment of assumptions. The book-style definition refers to the process of evaluating the consequences to the project if an assumption turns out to be false. To translate that into human speak, we are asking, if this goes wrong, how bad is the bruise? Imagine you assume it won't rain during your outdoor wedding. The likelihood might be low, but the impact of a downpour is huge. Everyone gets soaked and the cake is ruined. In project terms, if you assume a stakeholder will give you a yes and they give you a no, does the project stop completely or is it just a minor delay? As RMPs, we focus our energy on the assumptions that would break the project if they were wrong. By doing this, we identify which stakeholders are critical path stakeholders. So, now that we've started weighing the danger of being wrong, you might be wondering how we turn these dangerous beliefs into real risk entries. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is the assumption to risk conversion. This brings us to the risk conversion process. Technically, this is the act of rephrasing a shaky or high impact assumption as a formal risk in the risk register. In our simple classroom terms, we are turning a hope into a plan. Instead of saying, we assume the marketing director will approve the ads, we write down, there is a risk that the marketing director may not approve the ads, leading to a 2-week delay. See the difference? One is a passive thought. The other is an active risk that needs a manager. I've seen so many projects fail because they kept their assumptions in a separate dusty list instead of putting them where the action happens, in the risk register. This forces you to engage with the stakeholder behind the assumption. You've probably seen this. Once a stakeholder sees their name in a risk register, they tend to get a lot more talkative. Now, while turning these into risks is a great defensive move, we need a way to keep watching them as the project moves forward. Which brings us right into our final step. Finally, we reach continuous assumption monitoring. The formal way to say this is that assumption analysis is an iterative process that must be performed throughout the project lifecycle as new information becomes available. In plain English, you have to keep checking your beliefs against reality. Just because an assumption was true in January doesn't mean it's still true in June. People change their minds, budgets get pulled, and new stakeholders arrive with their own sets of assumptions. Stay with me here, because this is where the best RMPs shine. They are constantly asking, is this still true? Do we have proof yet? It's like checking your GPS while you are driving. You don't just look at it once and then close your eyes. By keeping this analysis alive, you ensure that your stakeholder engagement strategy is always based on facts, not just wishful thinking. It's been a long journey from our first hunch to this disciplined monitoring, but this is how you keep your project on solid ground. So, now that we have mastered how to hunt down and test our assumptions, well, that brings us right into our next step. We are going to discuss constraint analysis in details in next chapter.